Hi, my name's Kathy Millett, and this week we're on the last episode of the Halo Diorama. We're adding a background in to make it look like it's part of a Halo game. So I love Halo games and I love dioramas, but sometimes when you do a model, they're just lacking something. They often just have quite a plain background. If you can get them outside and take a photo with a great backdrop, that's wonderful. But I don't happen to have a jungle anywhere nearby where I can take my diorama to, and I'm not sure I'd get all the perspective right anyway. So I've done the next best thing and I've dug out a photo from the internet. Now, I did try downloading the actual Halo game itself, but you end up with all the visor in the way, and I know there's a way you can get rid of it, but I haven't managed to get there yet. So what you end up with is all the visor sort of little gloopy bits. And instead what I did was I recreated all of those in an independent file. And I'm not going to show you how I did that because it was really quite complicated, but I've put the file on my website. If you subscribe, you can get hold of it. The other thing that I did, apart from getting a JPEG of the background from 343 Industries, they're the original creators of Halo, so you just have to watch copyright. If you were going to sell this, you couldn't. But the other thing I did was get my photo of my diorama from Lightroom for where we got to at the end of last week. Now, I've done this as a test video a couple of times, and I realised how complicated a lot of the stuff on Photoshop is. So there's three basic principles of what we want to do. We want to get the position right, we want to get the colour right, and we want to get the exposure right. And at the moment, none of them look right when you put them together. So you end up with three photos that just don't mesh. And your eye just looks at it and goes, eh, eh. And that's what we want to avoid. So if you don't have Photoshop, you won't be able to do it necessarily the same way, but these principles will work in any graphic photo editing program that you have, and you'll just have to go out and work out how you did it yourself. The key thing is you need to be able to work in layers because you want to treat the photos differently. So either you do all the editing on one photo and bring it into another, or you do what I do in Photoshop and you have loads of layers. So whatever you choose to do, this is how I would do it in Photoshop. So the first thing I'm going to do is open Photoshop, and I've got three files open. So let me just get in there. This is the first file. This is actually the background from 343 Industries, and you can see their logo in the corner. And I love this background. This is one of the things when playing the level that initially drew me to this as a location to model, just that feeling of depth. But how do I get that feeling into my diorama? Well, I'm going to use this as a backdrop, and I'm going to try and use these colours. The next file is from the actual photo that you might see when you're on screen. So it's got his rifle, it's got the bottom of the visor, which, to be honest, I hadn't noticed. Shows how little you pay attention. It's got how many shots he's got left and what gun he's got, a little bit around the top of the visor. This goes red a lot for me. Probably less red for people who are better at playing the game, but it means you're not doing very well. How many grenades, and then a little map at the bottom that shows you how many people are about to come and attack you, which in this case is 3. So I'm going to put this as the final layer on top of everything else. So until then, we don't need to worry about it. And then the last photo that I've got is the actual picture that I took of the diorama. Here we go. Oops. So the first thing I need to do is to drag them all into one file so I can work on them. And I'm going to use the diorama file because it's the largest. So all I need to do is go to each of these, hold down the Shift key, for some reason it's supposed to help, and drag each layer into that underlying file. So there we go, you can see it's just appeared on top. I go to the campaign JPEG and drag that into here as well. And then I just want to make sure that I unlock this background layer by pressing this. And if you press it, it will just disappear because I don't want it to be hidden or unable to be used. So I'm just going to call layer 1 background. I'm just going to call layer 0 trees. And I'm going to move these into the right order. But first of all, I'm just going to shut these other ones, which I don't need. And I'm going to press F, which takes it to full screen. And if I hold down the the space key, I can just move this around. So I'm going to move it over there. So this is going to be the final size, and you can see that everything else is a bit big. So first of all, I'm going to make my final visor the same size. I'm actually going to put the visor on top and the background at the bottom, and I can just do that by dragging them around over here. So just to hide the trees. So I just want this to be the same size, and it's easy enough if I select final visor to change it. All I need to do is hold shift whilst I'm dragging them up and down, and shift just makes them all the same size. By that I mean it won't distort the ratio, so I don't end up with, I can't move it anyway except in a rectangle. Whereas if I didn't hold shift, I could make it a square and distort everything. So there we go. Yeah, right. And then what I want to do is make the trees just that little bit smaller, but I want it to fit in to what I have. So I'm just going to drag them down, again holding shift so I don't create any issues, and drag them into the right spot. But when I do this, I'm actually going to hide this final visor because I want to be able to see things without it. And you can just click this eye and it will disappear. When I do this, I can't see where I'm placing it. So if I go over here to the opacity and make it about 50%, I can see them, but I can still see the background through. So now when I drag it around, I can see what I'm doing. And I want it bigger. So holding shift all the time, I want it big enough that it covers a lot of the scene. This almost disappears to this side. And let me just, I kind of want those to, because they come off the edge, to be there. I'm going to make it just that little bit bigger, and then I can drag it down a bit. But I want to emulate this little bit here with this. So that's about where I get to. Quite happy with that. So now I'm just going to put the opacity back up to 100% and it disappears. So at this point I'm going to get rid of the blue background. It's really easy to get rid of the blue background, and that's why we photographed it last week on a blue background. So what you need to do is go to select colour range, and up here, actually I'm just going to whap somewhere else. What it does is when you press somewhere, it selects anything of that colour. And if you hit the plus, oops, I actually need to go here first. If you click it, it will collect something. And if you hit the plus, you can keep adding to what you've done. So what I'm looking for is a nice, clear, black and white image that is going to have all of it neatly selected. And if I do OK, it now selects the blue. Now, I don't want the blue selected. I actually want the tree selected. So I just go to select inverse, and it will now be selecting the tree. And you can't really see a difference, you just have to go with it. And then what you do is you go Command J. Now there's no doubt a long way of doing this on the menus, but the shortest way is to hit Command J. And it duplicates the trees onto a new layer. If we hide the other one, you can see you've just got the tree, and that's all. You haven't got anything else. So it's really useful for when you just want to bring something forward. You can select it and then it will come forward. So we've now cut out our tree from that blue background, and we can put it in front and we can see what's behind. So my next step is just to crop it down so I can see exactly what I've got to deal with as I want it. So if I press C for the crop tool, it's over here, you can select it. I can just drag these down a bit, and what I find is, this is 16:9, it never drags quite the way. I tend to drag it more or less close, and then I zoom in a bit, because otherwise I just, as you saw earlier, I just click back and forth. And I just want to drag this corner in, and then drag this corner in. Oops. Let me just line it back up again. And then drag this corner in. There we go. It should be, this is set on 16:9. Yeah, it's just a little, needs to be a little bit smaller. It would help if I didn't go. There we go. So here we go. Press return. Now, I've now got my picture in the range that I want it, and if this looks very quick, this is about the third or fourth time I've done it in practice, and I've done it with different pictures into the same background to see what I wanted. So I've already done a lot of the thinking about where I want it. But when I look at it now, I go, it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit for two reasons. One, the colours are just completely wrong. Two, it's too bright. Everything else is a lot darker. This is a dark jungle. So what I want to do is basically make the exposure just a little bit darker. And the easiest way to do that is to add a curves layer. So if you come down to this section here and click here, you can do a curves adjustment layer. And this basically can affect colour, it can affect light. And this is almost all I'm going to use on this. Not because there aren't other things you can use, but because I don't want to be too confusing. So if you drag it up, it makes it lighter. If you drag it down, it makes it darker. And you can change the dark points and do all sorts of weird things. And if you don't like it, just undo. But the trouble is, if I do this, it's making the background dark as well. And I only want it to affect my one layer. So how do I prevent this affecting everything beneath it? Easy. If you press Alt or Option, Command or Control, I think it is on a PC, and G, it does a little down arrow, and that tells you it's only affecting the layer below. And now if I drag this up and down, you can see it only affects the tree, which is excellent. I'm just going to shrink this down a bit so I can get the picture as a whole, because I don't want it to be too, I want to be able to see the whole picture. And what I want to do is I just want to drag it down a little, not a huge amount, but until it starts looking more in keeping. This is a dark jungle. I don't want particularly bright, and we're going to add just a couple of splashes of light at the end. And so that's where we go. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to, I want this side to be darker. Part of me goes, it's too divorced from this side, and this has got a dark bit here. So when it's coloured, I think it will fade in all right, but this, it's just a bit too bright, especially where the light source is over here. There'll be less light on this side. So I'm going to add another curves adjustment layer, and I'm going to do Alt, Option, Command, Control, G. So it's Option, Command, G on a Mac. And again, I'm going to drag it down. But this time, I only want it to affect this side. And this is where we start to use layer masks. They're very complicated and they're very simple at the same time. So basically over here, I've got a white box, and that shows the layer mask. And when it's white, light shines through it. So everything comes through it. So at the moment, anything I do will affect the whole of that layer. If I make it black, nothing comes through. So at this point, we've got a choice. We can either completely make it black and use white brush on this to bring out the bits we want to have this curves layer affecting, or we can do it the other way around. I'm going to turn it all black, so then I just choose where I want it to affect. And to do that, I do the Shift key and the backspace key. Oops. And it brings fill and it does it to black. Unfortunately, it also reset this, so I just need to bring this down a bit. And now when I wiggle this, it makes no difference to the picture because, quite honestly, it's black. Nothing's getting through there. And on my brush, which is over here, if I hit B for the brush tool, and I then change these so that that is white, this is quite a big brush, so you can change your brush a bit smaller, and then I can just drag it down and just make this a little bit darker, and it will just fade in. And if it's too dark, that's a bit dark, you can just play with this and let it do what you want. Okay, so I'm just going to fade that down a bit. Okay, so that's basically my exposure more or less dealt with. We can always come back and adjust any of these later at the end. So now I want to do colour. So we're doing three things: position, we've done that, exposure, and then the colour. So this is the last adjustment, which is colour, and I'm going to use a curves level again. And I'm going to do Option Command G, that's Alt Control G on a PC. And I'm going to, instead of using RGB, which affects brightness, I'm going to go and pick green. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag it up a bit to put some greens in. And then I'm going to go and say, I actually want a bit more yellow in there. Now, you have to know that the opposite of blue is yellow. So we just want to put a little bit more yellow in it. So I'm just going to drag the blue down a little. And now I've got quite a green looking. And if it's a little bit much, I probably need to go back and make the green just that little bit less. The idea is just that it's subtle, that these sort of fade in a bit. But when I look at it, I find some of these greens a bit bright. And the way I can deal with those is I can actually go and put in a hue saturation layer. And I'm going to put this actually at the bottom. And what I'm going to do is going to look at it, and you can pick the different colours. So if I go to greens here and I pick that green, it selects it, and I can just drag the saturation down a little. Just becomes a little less bright. And if I then go and pick the yellows, and I go and pick, say, this one, I can just drag it, not a lot down, just a bit to take the colour out. So it's not quite so bright. It becomes, I don't want it monotone, and I quite like the reds being bright because they often are in the Halo game, but I just feel these are beginning to take your eye away a bit from the scene. So I look at it and I go, great, it's there, but the light's quite right. The exposure's there, but the light is just, it should be hitting the top of this branch and the edge here. So the next way to do that is actually to add in a layer, and then to clip that layer just so it only affects what we want. And then if you're on the brush tool, which we're still on, that was B for brush, if you hold down Alt, you can go and pick one of these areas and get a sort of a yellowy colour. Then over here it's selected that yellowy colour, and then I can just paint along this top edge and along down here. Now if you see, it is only painting on this because we've selected that we want it to be on the, when we did here, it's clipped onto this layer, so it's painting everywhere. And if I took the clipping off, like I have, you'd see I'm painting everywhere. But as soon as I clip it, it only affects that tree. But that looks a bit meh. I actually want to put a bit underneath as well. Just looks a bit meh. So what you can do is change normal down to soft light. And then it just adds a little bit of light in. Not a lot, but enough that if I hide that layer, you can see it just adds a little bit of a glow. Oops, wrong layer. Just adds a bit of a glow onto that layer, which is just what we want. So very subtle. So then all I need to do is turn on my final visor, and that's it. That's my final result of my picture. I've got the colours matched in, I've got the similar tones. If I'm not happy, I can go and add a bit more colour in. I don't want it to be too dismal and dark because I do want all the colouring from the diorama to come through. I've got the background, I've got the copy of this little swing through here, which was the aim. I've got my background that's come from the visor that's in front. Just what I wanted. So there we go, my diorama in a Halo video game. And of course, one of the important things, no matter what size you are, is to take time for yourself. So this week, we're going to Costa! Yay! We love our trip out to Costa after church. It's great. It's great. Kathy's friends are all there, so we get to chat with them. Kathy's family's all there, so we get to chat to them. Oh, it's fun. It's just a really social time. We have a great time. Well, of course, the best thing about church is Costa afterwards. Well, it's not actually the best thing about church. Obviously, the best thing about church is church, but we always go to Costa afterwards. I like it. Big Kathy always has a Pepsi Max, a bit of an addiction going on there with the caffeine, I think, and the Pepsi Max thing going. So yeah, so it's not easy to naffle that. But Mum's always willing to let me have a bit of her coffee, and Trish is quite protective of her tea. Not a fan of other people sharing her tea, no. So I sometimes get a bit of coffee, but you know, I just like sitting here and listening to Kathy and her friends, and a mum and sister and a dad sometimes comes, and it's lovely. It's just a nice family time, and I feel part of the family. Oh, I do love being here. This is fun. It's Costa. Love Costa. It's obviously one of the best bits of the day on a Sunday. Costa. We love it. Day out. Oh, this is one of my favourite days of the week. Yep, Costa. We just sit here and chat for hours. It's great. And then we go to the pub. Even better. Obviously for lunch. So yeah, this is fun. This is a Sunday morning in Costa. All the friends are here. It's fun. We love it.